Tonight we're talking about MELs and CDLs. So does anybody know what an MEL or a CDL is?
I know the minimum equipments list, but I don't know what the CDL is.
Okay, good. So minimum equipment list. So, I think we've said it before. We can still go out and fly even if parts are broken on the airplane, right? So, so our MELs are basically systems that aren't working on the aircraft, okay? And it gives us an idea as to, like, if it's not working, what has to be working, because in aviation there's always redundancy. Like, there's always two of everything, a system to back up a system, so um, this list basically tells us, and is kind of a guide as to, if this part's broken or not working, what happens to the airplane, what do we got to plan for, what do we got to change, and what else has to be working in order for us to operate the flight, right? So this is, you guys can take a look through this. It's on the Google Drive. You can see here that it's divided into chapters, right? You got your air conditioning, anything dealing with the air conditioning, auto flight, communications, electrical power, equipment and furnishings. Okay. Anything on the airplane that is needed to operate the flight, then there's going to be an MEL for it that says we can fly or we cannot fly. Okay. Or, we can fly, but those are kind of what it's talking about. So you got all these different systems on the airplane. So we can skip right to these different pages and look at each one of these. Some of the things that Davis talked to you guys about were the basic systems on board the airplane, right? He talked about like the primary flight display, the or the MFD. What is the MFD? Flight director or flight display. What is the M? Anyways, he talked about the FMS, autopilot, things like that, right? So we're going to go through and talk about some of these important MELs. But first, let's jump over here to the PowerPoint, and then we can jump into that manual and kind of go through some of the highlights of the manual, some of the important MELs that we see. So let's see. So systems. Dispatchers need to understand how these systems work and interact with each other, right? And if a component fails, do we incur a penalty or not? Can we even take off or not? So from a dispatch perspective, these are items of safety, or are they passenger comfort items? We've got MELs for things like cabin trim. Those little plastic pieces on the cabin. We've got MELs for the coffee pots. Those have actually been changed to what we call an NEF, non-essential Why am I blinking so bad? Non-essential function, but we used to, if the coffee pot was deferred, like we would put it in an MEL. But we also have things like the AC packs. You guys remember what the AC packs do that went over yesterday? Anyone? Anyone want to take a guess? I mean, it's like one of the functions is in the name AC pack, right? So air conditioning, it provides the environment control, right? It's also how we pressurize a cabin. But there's certain things that if that's broken, we need to go and change how we plan the flight because it limits us on how we can plan the flight. So let's talk about some of these systems, right? So bleed air. You guys remember what bleed air is? Anybody?
That comes off the engine, right? Like it bleeds off when, like, kind of like exhaust.
Yeah, so it's like exhaust on the engine, right? It's one of the exhaust ports actually. So did Davis show you guys like pictures of a turbine engine or anything like that and show you how they work?
Yeah, he showed us some pictures. I don't know. I don't remember any animations.
Okay, so let me do a high bypass turbofan. So, well, let's take a look at this one first, okay? And then we'll show you what a high bypass turbofan does. So, looking at this picture, you got the inlet or intake. Okay, so whenever we talk about an engine, there's like a four-cylinder engine or a four-cycle engine. I'm sorry, four-cycle engine. There's four main components. So you got the suck bang. What is it? Suck bang. No, suck, squeeze, bang, blow. That's what it is. So even like on a car engine, um, it goes through a very similar process to ignite the fuel, to compress the air, things like that. A jet turbine is almost identical as to how we get that thrust as it is in your car. It's just nothing like it at the same time. So what happens is we have an air inlet. Okay, the air comes ramming into this part of the engine, right? And you can see the shape of this engine. Um, this engine funnels down, right? So it's compressing the air as it goes from fan blade to fan blade to fan blade to fan blade to fan blade, right? It just continues to press. So these fan blades are spinning, and we call the fan blade spin the speed at which it spins. That's our N1. Okay, so our inlet, this is our N1 reading, and what's happening is we're compressing the air. So sometimes this gets spinning too fast, and we can have what's called a compressor stall, where it's no longer allowing engine into the combustion chamber here. Okay, or it's no longer allowing air into the combustion chamber because these fan blades are spinning too fast. So it just kind of like a wing, how it stalls. these fan blades will do the same thing. You can see the shape of these fan blades, right? The shape is a wing. They're little individual wings. So these are spinning, compressing that air. Nice. So as it compresses this air, what it does is it forces it into what we call the combustion chamber. Okay. So what happens here is fuel is injected into that compressed air. Okay. When it's injected, there's an igniter in the combustion chamber, a spark that happens, and it ignites that and creates a controlled explosion in the combustion chamber. Okay. And then as that air, so that explosion is what's producing that thrust, that force, right? And so what happens is after it leaves the combustion chamber, it goes into the exhaust, right? So it comes into this and kicks out the back of the engine. We call this thrust, okay? So the bleed air, we also call this the pneumatic system. All we do is there's a valve on the 6th and the 10th stage of the engine. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay, this is the 6th stage of the engine on a CRJ. And what happens is they take the compressed air off of this stage of the engine and pump that into the pneumatic system. And that's what provides our air pressurization. It's what provides our air conditioning. It goes through like cabin filters and stuff like that before they fill the cabin with it. But yeah, that's the stage of the engine that provides that bleed air, that 6th stage. Then we have more than just how many you see here. It also pulls it off of the 10th stage, which would be somewhere closer to here. Okay. So that's what bleed air is it's literally air bleeding off the engine. So think about what that does. When we turn on our bleed air, it also provides like our anti-ice. They'll take the heated air. Actually, I'm sorry. So the 6th stage was what, like right here somewhere? Anyways, the 10th stage, I think, is actually back here on the exhaust stage. But anyways, what they do is they'll take the bleed air, and it's super hot, and they'll use that to heat the leading edges of the wing to keep ice from forming on the wing. Because what does ice do to airplanes? Anybody know? My pilots should know for sure.
It decreases your performance by up to 70%.
Yeah, and how much ice for 70%?
That'd just be just a small layer on the leading edge.
Yeah, that's frost.
Frost. Yeah, it'll ruin a lot.
Yeah, so frost will reduce a wing's lift by up to 70%. And we're talking like 16th of an inch, 32nd of an inch worth of frost on a wing will decrease the amount of lift a wing can produce by up to 70%. That's just insane. One of my aviation meteorology teacher in college, he was a corporate jet pilot, flew for TAC Air out of Salt Lake International, and he said that there was a plane, one of their jets, they got called to get out of there. You know, the owner called and said, "Hey, we need to get to this place immediately." And so they got the plane out of the hangar. Well, the plane wasn't in the hangar. The plane, one wing was in the shade, one wing wasn't in the shade, like it was in the sun. But the one wing had accumulated frost on it. And so they taxi out to the end of the runway. They go full throttle. He said as soon as the plane lifted off the ground, because the one wing is still producing enough lift, right? He said they immediately went into a roll and almost didn't recover. You know, they didn't turn on their anti-ice or anything. They didn't de-ice. They took off and almost crashed the airplane because of the frost on one of the wings. Like, that's how dramatic it is. So that's why we pump that bleed air into the engine. So one of the things that it points out here, we use bleed air. When we use bleed air, we get a loss of thrust, right? Because we're robbing the engine of some of that air. Okay. Oh, gosh, so touchy. Like it says, used for pressurization, anti-ice, air conditioning. Bleed air, when we take off with bleed air on, it can lengthen our takeoff roll. So if you're at a really small airport, you know, if we can, we prefer to go bleeds closed, because they can shut off the valve that takes the air off the engine. They can shut that off. So if they can, and they're on a smaller, if they're like in Aspen and it's a shorter runway, they can shut off that bleed air and get better takeoff performance. Another thing that happens is, you know, could see a reduction of weight, could see altitude restrictions, or no icing. So if our bleed air or our part of our pneumatic system isn't working, you know, we can get, if the AC packs aren't working, we can get altitude restrictions, no icing. If the bleed air system isn't going into the anti-ice systems, or something's broken in the anti-ice system, you know, we have to fly in an environment where icing cannot occur. Does anybody know? I don't know if we've gone over this yet, but does anybody know what environment is needed for icing conditions?
Visible moisture and 32 degrees or less.
Actually, it's 10 degrees Celsius or less. So 10 degrees Celsius is, what is it? It's like 72 degrees. Is that right?
10 degrees Celsius?
Yeah. I'm trying to
Like,
remember the conversion.
no, I'm pretty sure 10 degrees Celsius is going to be close to 30 or less Fahrenheit.
No. 32 degrees.
10 degrees Celsius is 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
50 degrees. There we go. Yeah, 30 degrees 30 degrees Fahrenheit is 0 degrees Celsius. 32 degrees Fahrenheit is 0 degrees Celsius. I can't remember how to do the conversion.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Double
double it.
double and add 32. Is that what it is?
Double it and add 32. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, so 52 degrees. There we go. That is right. So, so 52 degrees and visible moisture. So visible moisture would be like a cloud, mist, fog, um, anything like that. And if you live up in Salt Lake, you know, even in the summertime at night, it can drop below 50 degrees. So icing's a real problem, right? And another thing we're going to learn about is our standard adiabatic lapse rate. And what that means is for every 1,000 feet that we climb, we drop 2 degrees per 1,000 feet, 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000 feet. So we don't even have to get very high off the ground for us to be into icing conditions, right? If we see a cloud and we're 10,000 feet above the ground, that's icing conditions. We can accumulate ice. So, so bleed air is an extremely important system on our aircraft. Okay, APU. What does APU stand for?
Alternate power unit.
Auxiliary power unit.
There we go. Auxiliary. Very close. So our aux power unit, or APU, is basically a jet engine in the tail. And what that does is it provides AC, electricity, so air conditioning and electricity on the ground. When you're sitting on the tarmac boarding the airplane and they've got the AC on, that's being provided by the APU. They don't have their engines spinning while everybody's boarding. They don't turn on their engines until after they push back from the gate. So think about this, okay? If our APU's deferred and we're in Phoenix in the summer, is that going to be pretty problematic if it's providing AC on the ground?
Because you burn fuel trying to run your APU.
Yeah, you do burn fuel when you run your APU, but if your APU is broken, which it can be, that means that nobody's getting air conditioning while they're sitting there waiting to take off, right? Until the engines turn on, you're not.
Well, unless you have a GPU, you can run it with a GPU, right? Ground power or not?
Nope. Nope, not air conditioning. So we've even had pilots like reject airplanes if the APU's out. You know, they're like, nope, not flying it. And I don't blame them because I've been on airplanes that have had the APU out, and we've been in, you know, Salt Lake City 70-degree weather. You get on that airplane, it's a greenhouse. It's like 100 degrees inside the airplane, you know. And the poor flight attendant pilots, they just sit there and roast when they shut off their engine. So that's why you'll hear the flight attendant say, please close your windows when you're leaving, you know, because it gets hot in there quick. So we like our APUs. Okay. It also provides backup bleed air, right? So the big things with the APU, we take a big weight penalty, or a possible weight penalty. Now, yeah, we're going to take a weight penalty for sure. It's not possible. It will happen. Arrival at the airport, or at our arrival airport, we have to have a GPU or a ground power unit in order to start the engine, because one of the main functions. Okay, so going back to this, so it provides bleed air to start the engine. and it's also our source of electricity on the ground. Okay. So if the pilot lands at an airport that doesn't have one of these ground power units, and his APU's not working, he can't shut off his engine. He has to leave one engine running in order to start the other engine, because it takes a lot of compressed air in order to get those fan blades spinning fast enough to create that combustion. And so we use the APU to start our engines when we're on the ground. Okay. And like it says, don't dispatch this to a hot airport because you're going to have passengers puking all over the place. It's just bad juju. And you'll most likely have a pilot reject it as well. But yeah, it creates a health hazard for the passengers. So our AC packs, still using bleed air, right? It's
Now, is PAC an anagram or an acronym for something?
Nope.
Curious why it's capitalized.
I don't know of what acronym it would be, but I've always just referred to it as the PAC, AC PAC. So I don't know. I'll be honest on that one. I don't know if it is an acronym. But the bleed air is routed to the PAC. It removes the water from the air, and then it pushes it into the air conditioning system and the pressurization system. Okay. So kind of important. One pack can pick up the entire load. So if you do have we call it a pack out, there's an altitude restriction depending on the airplane that you're flying. The 700, I want to say it's 31,000 feet. And then the air conditioning's not as effective. So again, if possible, you don't want to be flying this into Phoenix in the dead of summer when it's like 110 out there. Once they get off the ground, it's just fine. But when they're on the ground, it just gets hot really fast. So if both are deferred, we can still operate a revenue flight, but it would never, ever, 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 ever happen. Can I say that again? Ever. The main reason why is because we have to stay unpressurized below 10,000 feet. So we will cancel this flight 100% of the time and fix the AC pack. Continuous ignition system. Okay. This just keeps firing, right? And provides that continuous power if the air gets really turbulent or if we're in icing conditions. Okay. Kind of a bad thing. You don't see this one ever because this is one they like to fix as well before they'll send the flight. But yeah, no turbulence or icing. Typically, if you are dispatching a flight with this MEL, they're flying it's going to be a non-revenue flight, and it's going to be the pilots are just repositioning the plane to a maintenance base so the maintenance can work on it. Okay. Nose gear steering. So on our aircraft, the nose gear it does the steering, right? Nothing else, just the nose gear. So we aren't allowed to operate a revenue flight, and the reason why is because we have to be towed to the end of the runway and lined up with a tow truck, basically. don't want to be doing that with passengers on board, right? It's also possible that it, when you take off, you could, have additional problems happen or pop up in flight to where, you go to land and all of a sudden your nose gear are turned sideways or, something like that, and you blow tires on landing and get foamed down by the airport firefighters. So can't take off or land on a contaminated runway. Contaminated in the aviation world is going to be things like snow, standing water, anything that makes stopping hard. Just rain where the runway's wet, we don't consider it contaminated. We just call that wet. And typically we're okay. But contaminated runways, the braking action gets reduced pretty dramatically. So, anti-skid. What is an anti-skid system? Anybody know?
Is that in reference to a slip skid while
Nope.
flying?
No.
Yeah, then I don't know.
Yeah, so a slip skid's like when you're opposite rudder or opposite aileron and rudder, right? And you're like approaching the runway sideways. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's just flying uncoordinated. You're either slipping out of the turn or skidding into it or backward, whatever it's back.
Oh,
You're just uncoordinated flight.
Yeah.
Is that like anti-lock brakes?
Exactly like anti-lock brakes. Exact same concept, right? When the aircraft touches down on the runway, if the pilot just smashed the brakes or if the auto braking system was on and we didn't have this anti-skid, then the tires are going to like lock up and it's just going to be a mess, right? So the big thing here is that we incur a weight penalty, and once again, we can't operate on a contaminated runway. Basically, the pilot can't use any of the auto braking feature, and when he lands, he's going to extend his braking. Like he's not just going to like hop on the brakes and get real hot on the brakes. He's going to slowly apply the brakes, hit the or the reverse thrusters, and use like the whole runway to stop. So all right, so electrical, use AC and DC power, right? AC, the IDG. Do you guys remember how many IDGs we have on board the aircraft and what it does? Come on, nobody's going to laugh at you if you get it wrong. Somebody take a stab. What is the IDG?
There's just one, right? That's a prop thing that pops out of the nose.
Close. It's so you're talking about the RAT or the ram air turbine, or we also call that the ADG, auxiliary drive generator, right?
Yeah.
So that's the backup to the backup to the backup. That's a third redundancy in our system. So this IDG is one that's extremely important to remember. Okay, integrated drive generators. What is a generator? Like you hook up to your camping trailer.
Gives you power.
Yeah, so the IDG is our primary source of AC electrical power. Okay, memorize that. Super important. Okay, what is the backup to the IDG? We talked about it a little earlier. It's got power.
APU.
Yeah, APU. So the APU is the backup to the IDGs. We've got 2 IDGs on board our aircraft, 2 integrated drive generators providing our AC electrical power. What happens is if one breaks down and isn't working, we have to run the APU continuously throughout our flight. Okay. So somebody said that the APU consumes fuel, right? So what happens is if we have to run our APU continuously through flight, all of a sudden we've got 260 pounds per hour that we've got to add to our fuel burn, right? To run our APU. We also get things like weight restriction, or not weight restrictions, but a performance penalty, okay? And then altitude restrictions are big hits, right? So IDGs, we can fly without one of them, but remember, one of the caveats is the APU is running. Okay, so that means the APU and an IDG cannot be broken at the same time. It's like one or the other. Maintenance has got to fix one of them before we can operate that flight. Okay. Fuel system, single point refueling. Did Davis talk about that yesterday? So single point refueling, anybody tell me how that works? How many fuel tanks do we have in the CRJ?
There's 3. There's the 2 wing tanks and then the center tank.
Okay, so
And
what is
the single point is it's like it's a I guess say like a ring. It's an inlet, and you hook a hose with that snaps over the inlet, and then you pull a lever, and then you hold the a dead man. What's called a dead man. It's just a switch on a wire. And it's called a dead man because they talked about in that video. If you drop the dead man switch, like if the fueler had a heart attack and fell over, then the pump would shut off.
Yeah.
And then yeah.
Yeah, so it's the single point for fueling all 3 tanks, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
And then
that's.
you have.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to talk about overwing. If the single point doesn't work, then you have to like fuel like directly into the wing.
Yeah, so and what else happens? So if we have to do overwing fueling, what happens to our fuel load?
It's all done manually, and it's not like the single point advantage is just all pumps at once to all 3 tanks, but the overwing you have to do to each individual wing, and you can't overfuel one wing more than the other 600 pounds, I think.
Yeah. Does somebody have something else to add to that?
Are you going to have less gas, less fuel?
Yeah, less fuel. And do you remember why?
Because you can't fuel the center tank.
Exactly. Okay, so we take a big hit on our fuel, right? So if we've got a really long flight and we need, let me look up the exact number here. I've got my handy dandy dispatch book. I might have to jump online to figure it out. I think the max fuel, so for the CRJ 700, I want to say if the fuel is at max capacity, they're able to carry like 16 or 18,000 pounds. You take away that center tank, all of a sudden they can only fuel to like 10 or 11,000 pounds. So pretty big penalty, right? Navigation or other equipment. So weather radar. Kind of bad. You don't want to go into a thunderstorm if you can't see the thunderstorm on your weather radar. You can't see the severity, the intensity, lightning, things like that. The pilot, one thing is the weather radar allows him to see, where exactly the storm cell is in front of him. Okay. So if it's broken, he can see a cloud over there, but he can't see other things that will kind of clue him into how bad that thunderstorm is. Or, is that cloud still building or anything like that? It can get dangerous really quick. So no thunderstorms. FMS, what does the FMS stand for? This is another big one.
Is it flight management system?
Exactly. So flight management system. So what this computer does is it allows the pilot to, let's see, not mail. Yeah. So this is what the FMS looks like. Down here you can see this keyboard. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So what happens is the pilot will enter his entire flight plan into this. What waypoints or intersections or navigational aids he's going to be using. He enters all of that into this. Okay. And after he's entered it all into this, it goes into, like, it controls the autopilot system. It also controls, it displays the route on the primary flight display, or not, yeah, on the primary flight display as well as on the MFD. Remember it, but yeah, it displays all of that information to all of the different systems. This is kind of the brain of the navigation system right here. Okay. So if this is broken, the pilot is now operating what we call green needles. So, you can see what it's doing here. Oops. So, you can see here, this is what the FMS is doing, is it's giving them these waypoints, nav aids, like VORs, Vortex, things like that. It's identifying these for the pilot and showing him where he needs to go on his route. You can see this line here. So this pilot is flying from whatever VOR he's over here to this EAU waypoint. Okay, that's his flight path. You can also see it here. Origin, Minneapolis, distance 425 miles from O'Hare. You can see that he's using 12 right in Minneapolis he's flying direct to EAU or Eau Claire. So yeah, I mean, kind of a big important system in our airplane. So when that's broken, not just no RNAV routes, like no GPS whatsoever. Everything has to be old school flight planning where we go from VOR to VOR, and it's really the flight planning we're going to teach you guys in the in-class portion, where you guys are going to use jet routes, you're going to use VORs, things like that. So we're going to teach you how to do it as if the FMS was deferred, and then that way when you guys are working for an airline and you get an FMS deferred, you guys can be, flight planning pros or route building pros and can build awesome routes that, rock. Autopilot. So one of the things required for what we call RVSM, you guys should have talked about RVSM airspace, right? When you were talking about air traffic control. You guys talk about that?
Yeah, that's the much smaller layers, or like, so where you can fly a lot closer because the autopilot kind of keeps you in place.
Exactly. So we call RVSM stands for Reduced Vertical Separation Minimums. So in the air traffic control world, anything over, 29,000 feet, the separation minimums are 2,000 feet. Well, if you are autopilot equipped and you meet all the criteria for RVSM at 29,000 feet or above, then what happens is air traffic control can now space you at 1,000 feet vertical separation. And I really want to show you guys this video of what 1,000 feet vertical separation looks like at 39,000 feet going Mach 0.8. Let's see. Let's see if I can find. A good one here. Yeah, this is a good one. Okay, everybody pop this into your YouTuber and take a gander of that. Did everybody watch the video?
Yeah, that looks close.
Yeah, it looks and it feels extremely close, especially when you're in the cockpit. That was one of those A320s that flew over the top of him. You guys saw in that video. And he's up there spreading them contrails, you know. Darn government.
I know a few people who believe that. It's just kind of silly.
You know, if I didn't have such an aviation bug, in me, and I was, I don't know, then I probably would be a little more apt to believe it. But I've been in the cockpit. I've I've done a lot of studying and research and on weather and how things
And crop
happen in
dusting.
aviation. Yeah, crop dusting, crop dusting, like everything. It's just no, nope, not how it works, people. So autopilot kind of important. Cat 2, so Cat 2 landings, they have to do what's called an autopilot coupled approach. They have to fly autopilot all the way down to the minimum decision altitude. And if you guys remember, for Cat 2, that's 100 feet. If the autopilot's not working, 100 feet's a little too close for comfort when you're landing. So they say no Cat 2 approved, or no Cat 2 for autopilot deferred aircraft. Okay. VHF radios. VHF stands for very high frequency. It's how we, it's how the pilots communicate with the ground. It's how the pilots navigate using VHF. Like, pretty important. Have to have at least 2 working. The aircraft's equipped with 3. 2 for communications, 1 for navigation. And they can like switch the use of one of them to be either communication or navigation. So if one of them's broke, they'll make the second radio a navigation radio. So GipWiz. Does anybody know what a GipWiz is? In the military, we called them something else. but the military is not politically correct. So GIPWIZ is ground proximity warning system or something like that. I can't remember the actual acronym, but it's something to that effect. So what it does is it tells the pilot, like, oh, it's got a lot of features. It'll do the one that's like terrain, pull up, notifying the pilot that he's about to crash into a mountainside. It also does things like wind shear. It'll tell the pilot, hey, all of a sudden we've got a huge tailwind. It'll tell the pilot if he's descending too fast. It like calls over the radio and says sink rate. It's also the system that when they're on the approach, if you guys remember me showing you that video of an approach in Cat 2, you can hear the GIPWIZ call out minimums, or 500, 200 minimums. And then it does a countdown 50, 40, 30, 10, or 50, 40, 30, 20, 10 as the pilot comes into land. So kind of an important system as well. I mean, all of these are important systems. TCAS. What is TCAS? Does anybody know?
Traffic collision avoidance system.
Good. So it tells the pilots where other planes are, right? We have different levels of TCAS. The only one equipped on our CRJ 700 is TCAS 2. Actually, on all of our aircraft is TCAS 2. And what that means is that it also provides, so TCAS, the normal system, will just say there's a plane over here. So TCAS 1, there's a plane over here, plane over there, plane over there, So it's just giving the pilot like a couple little references, little blips, showing him where other airplanes are. And it's up to him to see and avoid. TCAS 2 provides resolution. So let's say we've got an aircraft coming this way, coming straight this way. We've got another aircraft coming this way. What it'll do is it'll tell the pilot down here. I better draw this. So we've got one aircraft flying this direction. Okay. And we've got another aircraft flying this direction. Okay. What it'll do is it'll tell this pilot here, you need to climb, turn left, climb and turn left. So climbing left turn to avoid this airplane right here. It'll tell this pilot you need to descend and turn left. And that's the resolution, right? Actually, it's typically right turns, just like right of way. It tells the pilots, hey, you need to turn right to avoid, descend and turn right. The other one, climb and turn right, so that they don't bump into each other, because that's really bad. SkyWest had a mid-air collision back in the early 90s. It's like 94, 93. Up here in Salt Lake, actually. I took off and climbed right into the bottom of a 727, I want to say. Blew up over the Kearns area. People had like arms and legs in their front yards. Pretty insane. can't remember the death toll. It was 20 plus, but pretty bad. But TCAS 2 is now required because of that. Is in commercial airplanes, we're required TCAS 2 so that we don't bump into other planes. A lot of pilots believe that TCAS is required to fly in this RVSM airspace. It is not required. What happens is if it's not working, the pilot contacts air traffic control and says, hey, my TCAS isn't working. I need separation. I need you guys to provide separation. And air traffic control says, okay. And that's it. DME. What does DME stand for again?
Distance measuring equipment.
Good. So this is what's telling the plane, hey, you're 40 miles from the VOR over there. Holy smokes. That was fast. So let's talk about the structure of an MEL here. Oh, so we've talked about MELs here. Right? We went through MELs. Let's really quickly talk about CDL. So a CDL is a configuration deviation list. Okay, so what happens is, excuse me, sometimes pilots or sometimes airplanes will have like antennas or aerodynamic sealants, a big one that I see all the time, or something structurally missing from the aircraft. So MELs are typically like a system or something along those lines. Systems in the aircraft, broken landing gear, broken flaps, things like that. Configuration deviation lists. This is like things that are normally on the structure of the aircraft to provide this or that are missing altogether. So, rivets missing. We've got one called a wing Rio CDL, but these CDLs don't necessarily prohibit the aircraft from flying, but it almost always gives us a weight penalty or a performance penalty to our flight. And so whenever we have a CDL, we need to go and look those up because the CDL is going to, we're going to have to plan our flight a little bit different because, we may have a weight restriction or we may have, a performance restriction that we've got to calculate into our flight planning. So configuration deviation list, minimum equipment list. Yeah. What time is it? 7:30. Why don't we take a lunch break? You guys good with that?
Yeah.
All right. Start talking about these MELs. So first we're going to kind of go over the format here. So in every manual that we use for flight planning, always, if you are ever unsure, and this is something that's going to help you guys out a lot when you guys go to an airline, if you are ever unsure about where to find something, common sense, please use the index because it's going to steer you in the right direction. Okay. Just breaks down by system what MELs we're going to be seeing. Okay. So first place, you always look whenever you're trying to find out what's going on. Okay. In this, it talks about how it's broken down. We're just going to go into them here. I'm going to find a good one to talk about. So as you can see, some of these are highlighted yellow. They're common ones that usually have a penalty. Okay, here we go. Let's look at our CPACs. All right, so when we're looking at an MEL, there's a lot of information in this tiny little box here. So this is MEL 2551 1 alpha, okay? So first you see the MEL number up in this top left corner. Next we see which item they're talking about, okay? You can see that this manual is set up for both the 700 and 900 because they're very, very similar. So this is our 700 restrictions and this is our 900 restrictions. In this class, we're only going to be using our 700, okay? Okay, so up, continuing across the top, this is a Cat C. MELs are categorized into how long can this part be broken before it has to be fixed. Now that can be determined by number of flights, that can be determined by hours, that can be determined by a couple of different things. But depending on the category, it basically is telling us how severe, how soon we have to get this aircraft into maintenance. Okay. Moving on, this here is the number that are of this component that are installed on the aircraft. Okay, so we can see here installed, there's 2 on board our 700. And then this box tells us how many we're required to have in order to operate. We need at least 1 operating CPAC in order to operate the flight. Is everybody good with that? Makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got a question.
Uh-huh.
In the category, is A like the most important category? And then
I believe category C is the highest. Let's come up here to our explanation here. Yeah, I believe C is the most restrictive, meaning that they've got to get it into maintenance the soonest.
Okay. So there's like A, B, and C then?
Yeah, ABC.
Okay.
Really, we don't care about that so much. Maintenance is the one that's going to care about that. As a dispatcher, we just kind of let maintenance take control of that as to when planes are in and out of service. So that's why I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'm pretty confident that Category C is our going to be one of our most restrictive, if not the most restrictive. I can't remember exactly how it's broken down, but not really important to dispatchers. So let's get back down here to our AC pack. So this is kind of important for you guys to look at. Also, right here across the top, let's say that it was something that restricted us from being able to go into RVSM airspace or Cat 2. It would be written right here. It would say something like RVSM and then a comma, and it'd say Cat 2. Okay, so that's where you would see that. That just means that MEL restricts you from doing either one of those. Okay. So here's our remarks or exemptions. So this is the box that really applies to dispatch. This is where we need to automatically go whenever we have an MEL. Okay. We're going to look, make sure that we've got the right MEL, right system that is being affected. We want to take a quick look and see if there's any like RVSM or Cat 2 restrictions. And then we want to look here, how many do we have? How many are required? And then everything else should be focused right here. Okay. So this tells us some of our restrictions. Right hand pack may be inoperative, provided, and then you can see this is labeled kind of weird, but O, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So here's all of our requirements. Okay. Right hand pack is selected off. That's something the pilot does. We don't care so much as dispatchers. Here's something that we really, 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 really care about when we're dispatching, because now all of a sudden all of our flight planning has to be done at or below 31,000 feet. Okay. At lower altitudes, our plane eats up a lot more fuel. Okay. So when we have an altitude restriction, typically the first thing I think about is now I'm going to need more fuel, right? We're going to take a huge penalty for fuel. Okay, the next one, RAM Air SOV is either verified operated or deactivated open. Okay, once again, this is something that maintenance is going to be looking at, right? We're also going to consider it if we have another MEL that says that the RAM Air SOV is MEL'd or not working, then we're going to come back to this and say, we'd probably call maintenance and say, hey, our RAM air is broken on this plane as well. What restrictions is this going to place? Am I still legal to operate my flight? Then the next one, operations are conducted in accordance with the AFM supplemental. So another thing that we don't really care about so much. So whenever we look at an MEL and we see something like operations are conducted at or below 31,000 feet, we really need to pay attention to those things, okay? This box just talks about what maintenance has to do if, if it's broken. So this goes into a little more detail about this. It just says none required if ram air SOV is operational. If required, deactivate the ram air SOV open per MEL 2152-1A. So they have to manually open that ram air SOV. This placarding, this is also something that maintenance takes care of, so we just don't really care about. But this box will tell maintenance where they need to put little labels on the instrument panels or circuit breakers and stuff like that inside the airplane. Sometimes maintenance is required to put a placard on the airplane saying this isn't working. Okay. Operations procedure. This is something that sometimes we pay attention to, so this would be the next most important. But typically it's not something very dispatch oriented. A lot of times this is still maintenance. So these 3 boxes are typically maintenance. Sometimes we can see a procedure inside there that we need to take into consideration. But really, these are the only 2 boxes that we ever look at and care about in dispatch out of the 4. So let's see if we can find some more here. Let's get down into a different system here. There we go. All right, here is a very good example of everything I just talked about. Once again, we're going to take a look at the MEL box, make sure that the MEL that we see for our aircraft is matched up with that number. We're going to make sure that that system is also matching our information. Here you can see the RVSM Cat 2 restriction. So automatically before we even get into either one of these boxes, we already know that we are not going to be able to fly in RVSM or Cat 2. Okay, so flight directors, this is works with the FMS. This is where I showed you guys that airplane was flying from Minneapolis to Chicago O'Hare, and you could see that waypoint out here, Eau Claire, and then the line going to it. That's the flight director, okay? So here's our restriction. I think I had that backwards. Cat C is the least restricted, least amount of time into maintenance. Category A is the most restrictive. So I apologize about that. Thinking back on it and now seeing this really jogged my memory. But it is A, B, and C, okay? So we've got 2 installed. We aren't required to have any working. Kind of interesting, right? Okay. Once again, this main bullet point is telling us we can continue to operate if the autopilot is considered inoperative and the toga switch is considered operative, okay? So wind shear guidance will be inoperative. However, all remaining wind shear functions will be available. We'll talk about why wind shear is so dangerous and such a hazard to aviation when we talk about aviation meteorology, okay? But just know that there's special equipment on board our aircraft that tells the pilot when there's a wind shift and dramatic change in speed of wind. Let's say that they're coming in for landing, they hit a 15 knot headwind, and right after that they hit a 15 knot tailwind. That's pretty dangerous because it's not planned, and all of a sudden, they've got this huge tailwind. It gets pretty scary. So we need a warning system saying something to detect and notify the pilot, hey, you're in wind shear. So kind of a big deal. You can see here in the operations procedure, approach Cat 2 not authorized, wind shear guidance considered inoperative, autopilot considered inop, both toga switches inop, RVSM not authorized. Okay. So pretty bad stuff. We'll also see some other, super restrictive MELs when we're talking about avionics and systems. But you guys kind of get the point, right? You guys understand how to read these MELs?
Yeah.
The biggest thing that I want to kind of prepare you guys for with these MELs is when we're doing our flight planning, you guys need to pay attention, special attention to these operation procedures, okay? Operation procedures in the remarks or exceptions, okay? Because what will happen is when we're doing our flight planning, let's go to one that we commonly throw at you guys. And I'm giving you guys a huge pointer on getting you guys ready for flight planning with this one. But okay, here we can see some big restrictions. I don't know why this one's not highlighted, but okay. IDGs, what are our IDGs? What's the primary purpose of our IDGs?
Generate electricity, I believe AC current through the aircraft while it's not running.
No, this is when the engine's running. So these are directly controlled by the primary engines, okay? But yeah, its primary purpose is to provide AC electrical power, okay? You can see Cat A, 2 installed, 1 required. And this is what we need you guys to pay particular attention to, even as dispatchers, okay? When you get this deferral, notice here what it says. APU generator is operated continuously throughout flight, right? So, what has to be working in order for you guys to have this MEL?
The APU.
There we go. So if you have an MEL that says the APU's not working, we can't operate this flight, right? They're conflicting. This tells us that we have to have an APU working. If the APU's not working, we only have one of those on board the aircraft. You ain't going nowhere. So pay attention to things like that, because when there's a requirement for an additional system to be working in order for us to have that MEL, that additional system can't be MEL. Pretty common sense, but it trips up a lot of people. Okay, because they'll just come in here and they'll say, oh, we just have to operate our flight at 32,000 feet or below, right? Oh, and the APU has to be on, so I'm just going to do the 260 pounds per hour. And then they'll go and they'll look at the APU MEL, and which is right. It's coming up. It's coming up.
I think you passed the one that said APU. It was like 5 below the first one that you talked about.
Here we go. Yeah, I don't know why this one's not highlighted. What the heck, Adam? Okay, APU generator system. So APU's not, or the IDG, one of them's not working. APU must be working. They'll read this one, they'll just say, oh yeah, we've got an IDG operative, and that's all they really care about, right? So don't fall into that trap, because A pilot's going to be calling you and saying, what the hell? And B, you kind of look like a fool when you do that in real life, if you were to do that in real life. 90% of the time, maintenance already knows that both have to be working, or the APU has to be working if one of the IDGs is out. They know these MELs as well, but sometimes they don't catch it. And if they don't catch it, we're the last line of defense, right? We're the ones that are putting our name on the flight plan saying, hey, we're good to go. So if we're not good to go, it's kind of bad, right? Let's see. See if we've got some CDLs here that we can kind of talk about. That's pretty much the long and short of MELs. Just pay attention to what you're doing. That PowerPoint that we went over, please, 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 that PowerPoint has a lot of information that you guys will need the rest of your career. I mean, every plane has IDGs. Every plane has an APU. Every plane has, hydraulic systems. Every plane has all of these same systems. They may work just a little bit differently, but all of them have them. And so those bleed air problems, the electrical problems that we talked about in that PowerPoint are going to be common throughout every single aircraft. You're going to have, you need to be thinking about when you see an MEL, you need to automatically go or think to yourself, how does this affect my flight? And you need to do a little detective work and find out how it's going to affect your flight, because missing these is a really bad thing. It puts people at risk if you miss them, if we're not on top of these, right? You got a plane of 76 passengers. You just put 76 passengers and 4 crew members' lives at risk by missing that. So it's kind of a big deal. Sorry, I'm trying to get down to page like 200. This is taking forever. Because I want to show you the difference. Remember the main difference between an MEL and a CDL. Typically, MEL is dealing with like systems, and CDLs are going to be dealing with like the structural integrity of the aircraft. Oh, my Lanta. There we go. If this doesn't have any CDLs, I'm going to be pissed. Okay, there we go. Yay. Okay, so let's look at this. So it's set up a lot like an MEL. This just tells us System 27 flight controls. Here's our CDL number, 2750, right? It's affecting the outboard flap, inboard seal. So it's a seal that is between the flap and the end of the wing. So this tells us any number or combination may be missing provided the performance limited weights are reduced by, okay, and it gives us weight restrictions for our takeoff weight, our en route, and our landing weight. We're not going to deal with these too much. Well, I mean, we're showing you them, but really in this class, when we get into flight planning, we're not going to throw CDLs at you because this is all performance hits. It's never going to affect like we're not going to throw a CDL at you that you guys are going to have to go in and calculate your takeoff performance and stuff like that. But this affects like our takeoff roll. Also affects our en route climb, our landing weight, right? The other thing that it affects, fuel consumption, right? Plus 0.45% on used fuel. So automatically we take a fuel penalty on top of these weight penalties. And I know this doesn't seem like much, but when you have a fully loaded plane going to, you know, from San Francisco to Kansas City, it's kind of huge. And you could be bumping passengers in order to accommodate for the CDL. Whenever we have a CDL, you know, that is the override. If it's between passengers or implementing a CDL, we have to implement the CDL, right? It's safety related. So I'm sorry, Grandma, you're not going to see your grandkids for Thanksgiving, but you know, I'd rather that than have an airplane not be able to take off and run off the end of a runway. So CDLs are, here's another part. So that 2750 that we just saw above there, there's always a graphical representation of where they're talking about. So there's a sealant that runs basically along here and is located on this part of the wing. And it just shows us exactly where those seals are. But every time we're flight planning, we always need to incorporate these CDLs. If we have a CDL, we've got to incorporate it. Just like an MEL, right? So do you guys feel like you got a good grasp on this, or am I just beating a dead horse at this point?
Garrett, I think I missed something. How are these MELs and CDLs, these issues, reported to us?
So, lucky for us, at SkyWest, just pretend everything above this red line is blank, right? We've got these little boxes up here that we click on, and there's a box like right here that says MEL. We click on it and it will pull up the MEL. It'll say MEL 25-11-1A. And then it'll give us a brief explanation of what system that is. We have to go in and look these MELs up on a list. Just this manual that we're going through right now, this is the actual MEL and CDL manual for the CRJ 700 for SkyWest. So we will go and look up whatever MEL or CDL it is, and we will put it in, or we'll apply it to our flight. And even more lucky for us at SkyWest, we can right click on the box and it'll pull up the actual penalties and only the penalties that we have to apply to the aircraft. So it's a pretty slick system. As for this class, let me pause the screen so you guys can't see all my secret material and pull up a flight plan here. So these are the actual flight plans that you'll be doing. This is the way we give you guys the information for the flight plan. Except for this one doesn't have an MEL on it. Let me pull up another. 1 second. All right. So this is what your guys' flight plan packets that we're going to be working on look like. Here you can see the city pair. You can see a list of possible alternates. Our aircraft number, our passengers, how many bags we have on board, and then right here you can see MEL 3022-1. So in this class, what we want you to do is we want you to come in and we're going to pull this one up, 30-22-1. Okay, right here. So we'll look up this MEL, say this is the engine cowl anti-ice SOVs. Come into here, look at our remarks and exceptions. And it says right here, aircraft is not operated in known or forecast icing conditions. Okay, so that 10 degrees Celsius visible moisture present, that's what we're going to look at. Okay, so whenever we see that MEL, we're going to go back to our flight plan packet here, and we're going to look at our weather, and we're going to get an idea. Now that we know what the MEL is talking about, we're going to look at our weather and see what's going on at our airport, our takeoff airport. Then we're going to go and take a look at what's happening at our destination airport, which is going to be down here. Oh, I passed it. Okay. And we're going to go, am I going to be flying into known or forecast icing conditions? Remember what I said, 10 degrees Celsius visible moisture. Look at this one real quick. So this is current weather in Kalispell, Montana. Okay, 1.5 miles of visibility. We've got light snow and mist. Here's our temperature dew point spread. Okay, the temperature is 1 degrees Celsius. Do we meet visible moisture and 10 degrees Celsius or below?
No.
No.
That's a no-go.
Yeah, we're not going to Kalispell, Montana with that MEL, right? So what you guys would do at that point is you would come up to, if this was your final and your practical test with Greg, you'd go up to Greg and you'd say, hey, Greg, we've got MEL 30-22-1, which is no icing, no flying into known or forecast icing conditions. And in Kalispell, Montana, it's currently snowing and 1 degree Celsius, so we can't operate the flight. And he would go, oh, good, we fixed it. So go finish the flight plan. But the key is that you identify that there's an issue that makes the flight not legal to operate, and you notify the instructor at that point. Does that make sense?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good, because you guys are going to be learning how to do all that stuff soon. Let's see. There we go. Anyways, so that kind of finishes up. Do you guys have any questions on any of that information? Like it says in this outline for today's class, read through the highlighted areas of the MEL CDL manual, pay close attention, and read highlighted MELs. Okay. You know, I highly encourage you guys. I don't really have anything else to cover tonight. You guys are going to be going over weight and balance tomorrow with Davis. But I highly, highly, highly encourage you guys not to just like not review this PowerPoint at all. Please go in, look at it again, take some notes, and try to practically think about these things. You guys went through the system PowerPoint yesterday, and that's still on the Google Drive for yesterday. Try to apply these, try to make sense of them. Bleed air, loss of thrust, you can go into the MEL manual here on the Google Drive, and where it says, like IDGs, come in here, to the manual. Oh my gosh, this takes forever to pull up, and I keep screwing it up. Now it's not going to want to pull up. I broke it. Okay, coming here to the manual. We're talking about the electrical power with the IDGs. Go to chapter 24 on page 47 and look up the importance of the IDGs. Things like that. Get really familiar and comfortable with these MELs and with the systems of the aircraft, because this is your job soon, hopefully. With whatever airline you guys end up going to, it's going to be your job to know the aircraft, because as a dispatcher, you are the captain on the ground, and the captain has to know his aircraft, right? So take this to heart, learn the systems, get comfortable with them, play with this MEL manual, and really get familiar with it, because at the end of the day, it's kind of your job, right? Your responsibility. So, does anybody have any questions or anything they want to go over? Okay, well, you guys can finish watching the City in the Sky video to fill up the rest of the time, or you guys can come in here and play with the system stuff, go into yesterday's PowerPoint, and go through that information. And if you have any questions on this stuff, it doesn't hurt to do a little research yourself and Google, what is the CVR, and pull that up, do CVR airplanes, and it'll tell you exactly what it is. It's a cockpit voice recorder. Okay, things like that. Just do a little research, and if you have any questions, you're just stumped, shoot me a text, shoot Adam a text, anybody, and we'll help you out with it.